Story number 1.
The Silent Passenger. David loved late-night drives. The hum of the engine, the empty highways, and the solitude were a welcome escape from his hectic life. His job as a freelance photographer often took him to remote locations, and this time was no different. He had spent the day photographing an abandoned mining town and was now heading back to the city, the road illuminated only by his headlights and the pale glow of the moon. Around midnight, he noticed something unusual. A figure standing by the side of the road. A woman wearing a long white dress with her head bowed. David slowed down instinctively. The woman didn't wave or signal for help. She just stood there, still as a statue. As he approached, his stomach churned with unease. Something about her seemed off. Her dress was pristine, too clean for someone standing alone on a dirt road, and her hair hung in damp strands over her face. David debated driving past, but found himself rolling down his window. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" he asked. She lifted her head, revealing hollow, dark eyes. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I need a ride." David hesitated but nodded. She climbed into the back seat without a word, her movements slow and deliberate. "Where are you heading?" he asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. She didn't respond. Instead, she stared out the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The air inside the car grew heavy, the silence oppressive. David tried again. "What were you doing out there?" "Waiting," she replied, her voice barely audible. "For what?" "For you." Chills ran down David's spine. He laughed nervously, trying to shake the unease. "Well, lucky me, I guess." She didn't respond. As the miles passed, David couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woman didn't move, didn't blink. Her reflection in the rearview mirror seemed distorted, like it didn't quite match her appearance in the back seat. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I'm sorry, but I didn't catch your name," he said, trying to make conversation. "My name isn't important," she said. "But yours is." David's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice shaky. "You don't remember me, do you?" she said, finally meeting his eyes in the mirror. Her face twisted into a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. David shook his head. I don't think we've met." She leaned forward slightly, her presence suffocating. "Oh, we have. But you didn't see me then." David's mind raced. Was she someone he had photographed? Someone he had passed by without noticing? He tried to focus on the road, but the temperature in the car seemed to drop. His breath fogged the glass, and the radio crackled with static. "Where exactly am I taking you?" he asked, his voice barely steady. "Home," she said simply. But as David glanced at the GPS, he realized they weren't on the right road anymore. The device flickered, showing no signal, and the surroundings had changed. The highway was gone, replaced by a narrow, tree-lined path he didn't recognize. Panic set in. "Where are we?" he demanded, gripping the steering wheel. She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed ahead. In the distance, David saw a dim light flickering like a lantern. "You'll see," she whispered. He slowed the car as the light grew closer. It was coming from a small house, weathered and decrepit, sitting alone in the woods. "I don't think this is the right place," he said, his voice trembling. "This is exactly the right place," she replied, her tone chillingly calm. Before he could react, the car engine sputtered and died. The headlights flickered out, plunging them into darkness. "Stay here," he said, more to himself than to her, as he grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of the car. The night was unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no wind, just an eerie, heavy silence. As he approached the house, the flashlight flickered. The door was slightly ajar, creaking open with the slightest breeze. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing. No answer. Inside, the air was damp and heavy. The walls were lined with faded photographs, each one showing a woman in a white dress. David's breath caught in his throat when he saw one of the photos. It was the woman from his car. In the picture, She stood next to a man who looked just like him. His flashlight dimmed, and a whisper filled the air. "You left me." David spun around, but the woman was no longer in the car. She was standing in the doorway, her eyes burning with anger. "You promised to come back," she said, stepping closer. "I don't know you," he shouted, backing away. But as she moved closer, memories flooded his mind. Flashes of another life, another time. He had been here before. He had known her, and he had left her behind. The last thing David remembered was her cold hands on his face, her whispered words. "You'll stay this time." David's car was found abandoned weeks later, parked on a deserted road. The authorities never found him, but locals often speak of a man who roams the area, searching for someone he can no longer remember. And every so often, drivers report seeing a woman in white standing by the roadside, waiting for her next ride.
Story number 2.
The room that wasn't there. When Emma and her boyfriend Liam rented the old countryside house for a weekend getaway, they were thrilled. It was the perfect escape. Isolated, charmingly rustic, and surrounded by nature. The house had stood for over a century, and though it had been renovated, it still held an eerie old-world charm. As they unpacked, Emma noticed something odd. The house's floor plan seemed inconsistent. "Liam, did you notice there's a window on the outside that doesn't match up with any room inside?" she asked, pointing it out. Liam shrugged. "Old houses are weird. Maybe it's just boarded up or walled over." Emma frowned but let it go, for now. That night, as they settled into bed, Emma couldn't shake the thought of the window. The house felt strange, like it was hiding something. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the creaks of the old house sounded almost like footsteps. In the middle of the night, Emma woke to a sound, a faint tapping. It was rhythmic and deliberate, coming from the other side of the bedroom wall. "Liam, do you hear that?" she whispered, shaking him awake. He groaned. "It's probably just the pipes. Go back to sleep." But Emma couldn't. The tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. The next morning, Emma decided to investigate. She measured the space between the windows on the outside and compared it to the interior walls. Sure enough, there was a gap, a room-sized space that wasn't accessible from inside the house. "There's definitely something here," she said, showing Liam her findings. "Maybe it's an old storage area or a structural quirk," he said, though his voice lacked confidence. Emma wasn't convinced. As they explored, she noticed scratch marks on the floor near one of the walls, as if something heavy had been moved repeatedly. "That's odd," she muttered. Liam, growing uneasy, suggested they leave it alone. "Let's just enjoy our weekend, okay? No need to get spooked over some old architecture." But Emma couldn't let it go. That night, the tapping returned. It was louder, more insistent, and seemed to be coming from multiple places at once. Emma got up following the sound. It led her to the living room, where the wall with the mysterious gap was located. "Emma, what are you doing?" Liam called, stumbling after her. "I need to see what's behind here," she said, grabbing a flashlight. She ran her hand along the wall, feeling for anything unusual. Then, her fingers brushed against a small hidden latch. She hesitated. "Did you know about this?" Liam shook his head, his face pale. Emma pulled the latch, and with a groan, a section of the wall swung open, revealing a narrow doorway. The air inside was cold, far colder than the rest of the house. The smell of damp earth and decay hit them immediately. Emma shined her flashlight inside. The room was small and empty, save for a single wooden chair in the center. And on the chair sat a doll. It was old, its porcelain face cracked, its dress tattered. Its eyes, cloudy and lifeless, seemed to follow Emma as she stepped closer. "I don't like this," Liam said, his voice trembling. "Let's just close it up and forget about it." But Emma couldn't tear her eyes away. Carved into the walls were words scrawled over and over. "Let me out." Suddenly the door slammed shut behind them. The flashlight flickered, and Emma screamed as the room plunged into darkness. "Liam! The door! Open the door!" she yelled, banging against it. "I'm trying," Liam shouted, his voice muffled from the other side. The tapping began again, this time coming from inside the room. Emma spun around, her heart racing, and saw the doll. It was no longer on the chair. It was standing. Liam finally managed to force the door open, pulling Emma out just as the room fell silent. They slammed the hidden door shut and pushed a heavy bookshelf in front of it. "We're leaving," Liam said, his voice shaking. But as they packed their bags, the tapping started again. This time, it was louder, more frantic. And it wasn't just coming from the wall. It was coming from every corner of the house. They fled that night, leaving their belongings behind. Later, Emma tried to research the house, but found almost nothing. No record of its construction, no mention of previous owners. It was as if the house itself didn't want to be remembered. But every now and then Emma still hears tapping, soft, rhythmic, and deliberate. And sometimes, when she looks into dark corners, she swears she sees the faint outline of a doll watching her.
Story number 3.
The Phantom Bell. Nestled in a quiet valley, the village of Dunsmore was the kind of place that time forgot. Its cobblestone streets, ivy-covered houses, and ancient church gave it an almost storybook charm. But among the villagers, there was an unspoken rule. No one went near the bell tower after dark. The church's bell, forged centuries ago, was rumored to ring on its own. Always at midnight, and always before someone in the village died. It was curiosity that brought Clara to Dunsmore. A journalist with a knack for uncovering obscure legends, she had heard whispers of the Phantom Bell and decided to investigate. "You'll find no one to speak of it," the innkeeper warned, as he handed her the room key. "And you'll be wise to leave before midnight." Clara smiled politely. "I appreciate the advice, but I'll be fine." The innkeeper said nothing more, but his wary glance lingered as she walked away. The church tower loomed over the village like a watchful guardian, its weathered stone darkened by centuries of rain. Clara decided to visit it during the day, hoping to dispel the ominous tales. Inside, the church was eerily quiet. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. The bell tower's staircase spiraled upward, disappearing into shadow. Clara hesitated before ascending. Each step creaked under her weight, and the air grew colder as she climbed. When she reached the top, the bell came into view. It was enormous, its bronze surface tarnished and covered in strange markings, symbols and carvings that didn't match the rest of the church's architecture. Clara ran her fingers over them, shivering at the chill emanating from the metal. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Clara jumped, spinning around. A man stood in the doorway, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He was tall, with a gaunt frame and piercing blue eyes. "I didn't hear you come up," she said, forcing a smile. "I've been the bellkeeper here for many years," he said. "Few dare to climb this tower. What brings you?" "I'm a journalist," Clara explained. "I'm writing about local legends. The bell, for instance. Why does it ring at midnight?" The man's expression darkened. "It's not a legend, miss. The bell tolls for the lost. It always has." "The lost?" He nodded. "Those who wander where they shouldn't. Those who ask questions better left unanswered." Before Clara could respond, the man turned and disappeared down the staircase, his footsteps eerily silent. That night, Clara stayed awake in her room, waiting for midnight. The village was silent, the streets empty. Even the wind seemed to avoid the bell tower. At precisely 12 o'clock, the bell rang. Its deep, mournful tone echoed through the valley, sending a chill down Clara's spine. She grabbed her coat and flashlight, determined to uncover the truth. The church was darker than before, its shadows deeper and more oppressive. As Clara stepped inside, the heavy wooden doors creaked closed behind her, though she hadn't touched them. The air felt charged, almost alive, as if the building itself was aware of her presence. Clara made her way to the tower and began climbing the staircase. This time the creaks were louder, almost like whispers. When she reached the top, the bell gleamed faintly in the darkness, its surface slick with condensation. And then she saw it. A figure hanging by the neck from the bell's rope, swaying gently with the breeze. Clara gasped, dropping her flashlight. The beam flickered wildly, casting strange shadows on the walls. The figure lifted its head. It wasn't human. Its face was featureless, its body wrapped in tattered fabric that seemed to shimmer and writhe. "You shouldn't be here," it said, its voice a hollow echo. Clara stumbled backward, her mind racing. "What? What are you?" "I am the warning," it said. "And now you are marked." The bell began to toll again, each ring reverberating through Clara's chest. Images flashed before her eyes, villagers she had seen during the day, their faces twisted in fear. The bell tower collapsing, fires consuming the village, and a shadowy figure watching it all. Clara ran. She didn't stop until she was outside, gasping for air. The bell rang one final time, and then the village was silent. The next morning, Clara left Dunsmore, but the images and sounds stayed with her. A week later, she received a call. The innkeeper had been found dead, his body hanging from the bell rope, and every night since, Clara has been haunted by the sound of a bell, soft, distant, but growing closer.